Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write about it, and more.
With each podcast, Kerry Moynahan, a certified bourbon steward and bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobard, director of the Cocktail Collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit. It is September 3rd, 2021, and you're watching episode 51. Coming up, we speak with Global Brand Ambassador Matthew Cordiner. Stay with us. Hey guys, we're back, finally, after COVID-19. I'm Kerry.
I'm Philip.
I'm Louise, I'm the chef.
Chef Louise Leonard, as in Whiskey, A Chef's Journey. That chef.
Yes. We started shooting just before the pandemic lockdown, and now today, our very first day, you are catching us on set, and we would love to talk to you about how you can help get us from here to your TV set.
The thing is, we've run out of money. We mounted a pre-production campaign, which was very successful. Thank you very much for that. But now we're back into production, and we need your support for this phase. You supported us the first go round, or if you didn't, we welcome your support this time. The thing is, we want to take this show around the world, quite literally.
Quite literally.
And that takes money.
Yes.
So won't you help us get this to market? You can visit whiskeyachefsjourney.com for all of the information you're going to need to help us realize this project.
Well, I think it's a cheers to that.
Cheers.
Our guest today on Spirits of Whiskey is Mr. Matthew Cordiner, the global ambassador for Bacardi's Single Malts, including Aberfeldy, Altmore, Cregelakey, the Dewar, and Royal Brackla. All of those brands are owned by Dewar. Dewar and Sons, which of course is this. Okay, and which is a subsidiary of Bacardi Global Brands. Welcome, Matthew.
Yes,
Thank
welcome.
you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
It's lovely to have you. So we always start out every episode asking our guests about their whiskey journey. How did you become this global brand ambassador? Did you, as a wee little lad, think as a child that you would possibly ever work in the whiskey industry, or were you planning to be an astronaut?
Yes, a childhood dream of being a whiskey evangelist.
Yes.
I still can't believe I get to call myself a global brand ambassador. And to be honest, I still feel like a bit of a charlatan getting to call myself that, because it's a recent appointment. As you know, it's been kind of unofficially about 12 months now. But I think I must be the least global brand ambassador in the history of the title, taking on the role at the beginning of a global pandemic. So I've been saying on a good day, I get out of my bedroom, let alone postcode. So I can't wait for that first trip on a plane and hopefully get over to see you guys in the States.
Awesome.
We'll look forward to that.
But for me, the journey, it's...
I was going to say, where did you grow up and how did you get here?
Well, my hometown, I'm from Cregelakey. So of course, that little village.
Hey, there's a whiskey from there. Did you know that?
I believe there's a really good whiskey from there, in fact. So we'll come on to talk about that one later for sure. So it very much is home pride for me as part of this global role. But growing up in the village, you're kind of surrounded by people talking about whiskey. My parents didn't work direct in the industry, but a lot of family friends did. It's quite often the topic of conversations, around a dinner table or a bar. And for me, it was always just a passing subject. I honestly never thought I was going to end up in the whiskey industry. But you are honestly surrounded by, people say, when did you start in the industry? And I say to some of them, 5 years old. And they say, what are you talking about? And well, as soon as you start at Cregelakey Primary School, one of the first trips you do is to Cregelakey Cooperage, and they teach you how to build a cask, right? So there used to be a photo of me at 5 years old on the front of the pamphlet building my first cask, So
I love it.
So they had you over a barrel at 5.
There we go, indeed. But honestly, I never thought I was going to work in the industry. And then when I went off to university, the best summer holiday job, if you're from Speyside, is to come back and be a tour guide at a distillery for the summer. I went off to study classical music, nothing related to the industry at all. And looking for a summer holiday job, I thought, what am I going to do? I had a few older mates said, you want to work as a tour guide, cheap whiskey to bring back for all your mates at university and get you through, the next term. And it's just great fun, and the taste not bad either. So, that was it for me. I thought, right, I'll go work at distillery. I looked to see which one all my mates were working at. To save petrol money, as poor students, car share up to the distillery. And one of the ones I ended up going for the interview and got accepted was the Glenlivet. So that was
nice.
home for me to begin with. And I was a seasonal sort of tour guide there across a couple of different degrees. So ended up being about 7 years in total as a seasonal tour guide. But for year one, it was literally just, this will be a great summer holiday job. I'll go there, get some money, and that'll be it. But in that first year, I just absolutely fell in love with whiskey. And it's one of these things you've been surrounded with all your life. But I think it was more when I met people from out with the village, coming to visit distilleries from around the world. You suddenly just realized this is pretty special. Not everybody has a distillery in their village, and that's amazing kind of craft and history, that surrounds them. So
Well,
I really fell in love with it. Yeah.
Matthew.
But at Glenlivet, I met someone who I'm sure a name you'll be familiar with, Ian Logan, who was the global brand ambassador for Glenlivet, and again some of the other amazing global brand ambassadors in the team there. And I didn't know this job existed, right? And I thought, wow, this looks like a fun job. How on earth to become a global brand ambassador? And after my kind of time, as I said, as a music student, I then became a business student with mind of getting into the whiskey industry. And then Chivas Brothers had just started a grad program for graduates of many different. So I was the year 2 intake on their graduate program. What better program to get to travel around the world and talk about whiskey being based out of the market each year. So I was a UK brand ambassador based out of Edinburgh for year 1. Actually made it over to you guys in the States. So year 2 for me was Miami, of all places. So going from, a small village in the Highlands of Scotland of just under 600 people to moving into an apartment on South Beach, Miami, was quite an eye-opener as well. I didn't know which way was up for about the first 2 months, but I had the best time. I got to say the hospitality industry in Miami is something special as well. And then finished up the grad program. Year 3 for me was in South Africa, so based out of Cape Town. So it was just a great grounding in seeing how one brand can look so different in different markets, different countries around the world. And really good grounding for me, I think, in the industry. But when I was in the Miami, actually, I would not be in the job I'm in now if it hadn't been for, I think, week 2 in Miami. I ended up in a distributor's warehouse just outside, I think it was Miramar, just outside Miami. And this was me fresh off the boat. So again, I hadn't really got my Miami clothes, I'll say, sussed out yet. All I had to look smart was a thick Harris tweed jacket. And all I remember thinking, it's fine because Miami, it's the opposite of Scotland. You put clothes on when you get inside because you guys have the aircon, so low compared to what we're used to. So it's kind of the opposite. But I just remember this distributor's warehouse had like no aircon. And I ended up in a boxing ring at the time representing Chivas Regal, talking brand histories, battling it out against the National Dewar's ambassador, this amazing character and good friend now, Gabe Gardarella, as well, talking brand histories. And being from Scotland, I didn't really know much about Dewars because, in all honesty, it's really grown in the last few years. But at that time, it was very much an export brand. Obviously, massive #1 selling blend in the States just now for Scotch whiskey, but one I hadn't really heard too much about. And coming out of that boxing ring, I had just this newfound appreciation for Dewars, and I think it's so interlinked with the history of Scotch whiskey and amazing characters, as I'm sure we'll discuss shortly. But this guy, Gabe Gardarella, he said, next time you're back in Scotland, have you visited Aberfeldy? And I said, no. He said, next time you're back, make sure you stop in at the distillery for a visit. So my then girlfriend, now soon-to-be future wife, I always drag her around distilleries anytime I get the chance. She's not a fan of whiskey, I'll say that. She doesn't like drinking whiskey. She doesn't mind going around the occasional distillery. So I was really chancing my luck. I'd already visited a few distilleries on my trip. I said, look, on our way down from visiting my folks back up in Cregelakey, back down to Edinburgh, I said, any chance we can stop at Aberfeldy? It's just like a 20-minute detour. We'll stop in 20 minutes tops. 4 hours later, we were still at the distillery. And I just absolutely fell in love with the place. And if you get a chance to visit Aberfeldy Visitor Centre, you'll see why. I mainly spent my time in, we've got this living archive room, and it's just a treasure trove of history, and you can really sort of interact with it with iPads, and pull out drawers and old documents. It's just a TARDIS of whiskey information. It's absolutely amazing. So needless to say, when the job came up, I was still out in South Africa at the time, It was actually my girlfriend spotted this job. She said, "You really liked Aberfeldy, didn't you?" And she says, "Well, there's a job just come up with John Dewar and Sons to be based as the Aberfeldy brand home ambassador, but you also get to cover all their other distilleries for special visits, of course, one being Cregelakey." So I had a fantastic time with Chivas Brothers. I owe them a lot. And as I say, Ian Logan, who was their global brand ambassador, stepped down, was a real mentor for me. And I kind of spoke to him as well about, potentially going for this job. And he said, "Did you know, before I joined Chivas Brothers, once upon a time, I was the national Dewar's ambassador in the US." So he was a big fan of Dewar's and said, "You should go for it." So yeah, didn't look back. 2 years. As I say, Aberfeldy was really my spiritual home, which I know we're going to talk about today for 2 years, the brand home and visitor centre. And then just a natural progression from that role when my amazing predecessor, Georgie Bell, was stepping down from the global role to move on to another brilliant role in the incubation, which we fall under here.
Yes, we did here in Los Angeles. Here in Los Angeles, the Cocktail Collection, the Center for Culinary Culture, we hosted Georgie. She led a seminar on Bacardi Single Malts. It was very well attended and very educational and very liquid.
I talk about Ian Logan being a mentor. Georgie Bell has definitely become another mentor for me. She is an absolute fountain of knowledge, and a good go-to if there's something I didn't know for sure.
Yeah.
But and then when she stepped down, as I say, moved into the global role, just kind of over, I would say it was March kind of 2020. So over a year now. So not the time you should really be looking to step into the global role. An interesting time. I say, in many ways, the least global brand ambassador in history of the role, probably, but in other ways, being able to do podcasts like this and Zooms and tastings for festivals moving online virtually. I reckon I've probably spoken to more people in my first year in the role than most global brand ambassadors, just because of this new world we live in, right?
Far many more people this way.
Yeah.
I think so. And I hope, don't get me wrong, there's nothing will ever replace having a dram in hand, chatting face to face with whiskey enthusiasts.
High touch. High touch. However, is where it's at. Yes.
I hope that this continues. I think we've all learned, for a lot of people in whiskey, I will say, especially back in the villages, they're pretty old school. So, getting them savvy with using Zoom and things was not easy. But now that we've all got used to it, I think it's great that we can, invite them to virtual sessions and have a lot more FaceTime with, producers directly and malt masters and master blenders. So hopefully we can get some of them on your show down the line as well.
Now, you represent 5 brands, each of which is a critical component of Dewar's blended Scotch. And today we're gonna get together again and talk about brands 3, 4, and 5, as though there were any order. But today we're talking about 2 of them, Aberfeldy and Cregelakey. Can you give us the background on those brands, starting with Aberfeldy? Both of them have quite the history behind them.
They do.
And I am going to start with the 12 because, as you can tell in my voice, I still do have a nice summer cold. And I think this will help me from coughing.
So that's a toddy for you.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, it's not a toddy right now, but later probably it will turn into one.
I will say, if you're looking for a good whiskey for a toddy, it is 100% Aberfeldy 12. We have our golden hot toddy, and you'll see, I think, as soon as you pour some Aberfeldy into the glass, one of the first sort of flavors you're going to get hit with in the nose is honey. For me, it's just this lovely, rich heather honey. And Philip, you've got one of our lovely golden ticket editions there with a lovely wax edition, right?
How come he got all the good stuff? What's going on here?
This is his own. This is his own one.
Actually, this predates. This was given to me as a birthday gift or Christmas gift. Christmas gift by a neighbor.
Okay, and so Matt didn't give it to you. I feel better now.
The only difference is that there's gold wax.
Yes. It's beautiful. So when I was doing a different show in Atlanta, I was so shocked to see how much cheaper things were the further east you go because there's less shipping involved. So I went to this local store and I just stocked up on Aberfeldy and the Irishman because I couldn't. I mean, they were like half price based on what I pay for it here. So all summer, that's all I had was Aberfeldy and Irishman.
That sounds like a good summer to me.
There are worse situations.
Yes. There are.
But to your lovely gold wax you had there, Philip, that is the nickname that we have for this whiskey is the Golden Dram. Okay. And it's not only because of that lovely golden colour you get in the glass, It's not only because of that honeyed character and taste. It's not only because of all the gold medals we've been winning, and a lot of those recently as well, if you've been keeping track on the awards. It's actually to do with the water source. I'll come on to talk about that very shortly.
The Patilly.
The Patilly. Oh, spot on. It's like you're a local, Phil. You've nailed that. Not the easiest to pronounce, but the Patilly burn, for sure. But you can't really talk, I think, about the Aberfeldy story without talking a little to Dewar's. Because as you mentioned, we are part of John Dewar and Sons, and that really is where it began for us. As a blending company. And John Dewar, he was actually born just along from Aberfeldy Distillery, not in the village of Aberfeldy, but one of our neighbouring villages. I must have one of the funniest village names in Scotland. It's a little 4-letter word. Any guesses? I'll put you on the spot here. Do you know the name of this village?
No.
It is the village of Dull, literally Dull, Dull.
Dull.
And,
yes.
I don't want to get myself in trouble with the people of Dull, but I'm sure they'd agree there's not that much going on in the village. As I say, we always say the least dull thing to come from Dull must have been our founder. It was this tiny little place. And I think John Dewar, found it pretty dull back then, moving into his early 20s. And he'd grown up in this small croft up in the hill called Shenville. Had worked as a kind of apprentice joiner, like a carpenter, which is what most of his family did. But he thought, Dull is pretty dull, get me out of here. And he went to join a wine and spirits shop with an auntie and uncle in Perth, a kind of neighbouring town. And he really learnt his craft with them for about 20 years. And then in 1846, he decided, right, I'm going to open up my own shop under my own name. And that's really where sort of Dewar's began as a company. But back then, Dewar's as a brand started to grow, but they were relying on other people's whiskey from all around Scotland. The family didn't have their own distillery. And that's really where Aberfeldy was born. It was after the death of John Senior, John Dewar, in 1880. Two of his sons decided to take on this legacy, of the Dewar's blending business. John Alexander, who was really John Junior, he was very much his father's son, thinking about quality and consistency in the product. And then you had Tommy Dewar, the kind of youngest son, who was a bon viveur, a raconteur, this kind of traveling salesman he became for the company. And if you haven't heard much about him, look him up online, because he was this guerrilla marketeer way ahead of his time. If I'm going to give you one thing that he did, and one of my favourite stories, was when he headed down to London, they had a lot of dirt roads, and he realised this is wasted advertising space. So he designed a special bicycle wheel and patented it. On the back wheel of the bike, it had John Dewar and Sons Fine Perthshire Whiskey perfectly written round the wheel, so that when these bikes were ridden through the dirt streets, it printed in a perfect continuous line behind the bicycle, John Dewar and Sons Fine Perthshire Whiskey. He literally got John Dewar and Sons' name all over London. So it's that kind of thinking that he had.
It imprinted it on the dirt road?
It was an impress, so
that's awesome.
It printed it into a dirt track.
So in other words, John Dewar's name was mud.
Literally, well, it got it all over town though, as well, I'll say that.
Well, but now here that wouldn't work because it doesn't ever rain, so it would just blow away in 5 seconds. But we weren't short,
we're not short of rain in the UK, right? Going on to what you were saying, I think it was Billy Connolly famously said, there's 2 seasons in Scotland. There's kind of winter in July, right? And usually we have a good summer's day in July. Most of the year we get a good amount of rain, but today's rain is tomorrow's whiskey, as we say.
Yes.
So,
nice.
We're pretty happy with it all, to be honest. It keeps our reservoirs topped up in our water.
I used to have that as my cover photo on Facebook. I have a little beautiful Scottish landscape with that on it.
It's a good Scots proverb, for sure.
Yes.
But so that's really, why the distillery was built was really because of this blending legacy. And what they were looking for was something light, sweet, easygoing to be the backbone, the heart of the Dewar's blend. And I know you guys are tasting away here, and hopefully folks who are watching this back, get yourself a glass of Aberfeldy 12 in hand. And as we said, the first thing for me you're greeted with is this lovely kind of floral honeyed nose. But I don't know about you guys. Any other thoughts on that nose?
No, right there with you. And this is, Aberfeldy is the largest single component of Dewar's blended, correct?
I can't say it's the largest component as in single malt, because, for any Dewar's blend, there could be up to 40 different whiskies going in there.
Okay.
We say it's the backbone, it's the heart. It's got to be there. It wouldn't be Dewar's without having Aberfeldy.
So this is the signature single malt.
The signature single malt,
the Dewar's blend.
The heart of the blend is what we'd say. And I think anytime you taste a Dewar's blend as well, you will see that honeyed backbone, what the Aberfeldy offers clearly there alongside many other whiskies in the blend as well. But if you haven't had a taste yet, have a little taste as well.
Mine's gone. Right.
Mm-hmm. I had to refill already.
And I think that honey just develops into these lovely, ripe, kind of juicy fruits, alongside some dried fruits as well, because we use a combination of casks here. We've got a combination of first fill and our refill and rechar casks, we call them, within Bacardi, and of both bourbon and ex-bourbon, ex-sherry cask in there as well. So that tends to be Stephanie's kind of go-to recipe across her different malts, is that combination of first fill, refill, rechar, again, bourbon and sherry. For us as well. I just think it's such a wonderful, easy drinking dram. And I always say, whether if you're new to whiskey, I think this is one of the best whiskies to begin with. It's just so inviting and so easygoing. Again, we bottle the whole core range at 40% ABV, I think because of that. Just to make it that kind of really accessible whiskey. We move up to some higher ABV, as we'll see later, within the exceptional cask. But I think that really is the job of Aberfeldy, is just to be this easy drinking, really easy to enjoy Scotch whiskey.
It does its job well.
Hence why it was one of the two drams that I kept buying in Atlanta. I mean, I think there was a bar downstairs, but I was like, I could buy a bottle for what they're going to charge me for one drink. And so, the housekeeping people, I'm like, they're probably thinking I'm some crazy drunk in here, because like every week they come and there's another bottle in the trash.
I know it's over here, it's at a really good price. It's kind of about the sort of £35 mark. And I know that translates pretty well for what you guys get it.
About $45
as well.
Yeah, but I was getting it for like $25 in Atlanta. It was crazy. Maybe it was a special buy and I just happened to like pop in.
Right place, right time, I think, with that one. But I said, I mentioned I can't pass on the Patilly burn, something we talked about. I think it was a real kind of masterstroke where they decided to build the distillery. And one reason was it was very close to that ancestral home of Dull, which we talked about. So I think a real tribute to their father, building that kind of local landscape for the family. But as well, we had a railway line. So one of the first things you'll see if you visit us, or if you look up pictures, is with this lovely little puggy, we call it, the name for a kind of small Scottish steam engine train sitting out the front of the distillery. But we used to have a sidings kind of built on the side of the distillery, which was a connection from Perth to Aberfeldy there as well. And so it made getting all our raw materials in really easy, and of course all that whiskey back to Perth we were maturing very easy as well. But for me, the third and most important was the Patilly. Again, you can get all your raw materials sent in, as in your barley you can get delivered, your yeast you can get delivered, but you must build near a good quality source of water.
And as a water source, Patilly Burn is unique to Aberfeldy.
Unique, yet we're the only distillery now using it. There were historically two other distilleries that had used that source. There was an older Aberfeldy distillery built long before ours, which was the village itself, and we're just kind of outside the village now. And there was also a Patilly distillery, if you look back in your history books as well. So, historically it was always known as a great, pure, clean source of natural spring water. But
what
more
a great
than that,
name.
We're going gold panning. It used to be, you'd find people gold panning up the source, because Aberfeldy historically was known to have seams of gold in the hills. A lot of this gold over time was kind of washed down through the hills, and it became what we call alluvial gold, kind of nuggets shaped by water. And don't bring your welly boots and have a rake around the Patilly today. It's pretty microscopic. I think if you pick up anything now, it is more for the historic name there. But I think it was back in 2019. The largest piece of gold ever discovered in the UK, alluvial gold in water, was a nugget said to be found in Perthshire waters.
Nice.
And local contacts say it was not that far, I think, from us in the scheme of things as well. So
how
you
big
never
was
know.
it?
I think it was called the halo, they called it. It was a huge nugget found in two halves. I honestly can't remember the size and weight, but if someone found it, must be a very boring hobby, because it's Scottish water, in the rivers, it's not that clear. So I think someone in with a snorkel literally hunting for gold. So I can't think of any duller hobbies. Maybe it was quite close to dull, but worth it. I think it was payday when he found it.
So this vein of gold is the source of the name, the Golden Dram?
Hence the Golden Dram. It's always been known as that golden water source for us. It's something we talk about. As I say, we like to say, we do have a lot of gold medals as well. So that's definitely part of it.
What a great name, the Patilly Distillery.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Would that it were so still.
So, is anybody else allowed to use this water source now, or do you guys like own the property? How does that
I
work?
think it's protected by us now because the source. I mean, if you come to visit us at the distillery, you can see this lovely cascading waterfall. But that pretty much is our cooling reservoir, and the water coming over from that, kind of running back down into River Tay. But it's a well source, like a borehole, and further back up, we're taking it from underground. So I believe that is just us.
Was that
So
an
that's
invitation? Was that an invitation you just extended?
Yes, it was. I heard him invite
Oh,
us.
we'll definitely need to get you over. As I say, it'd be my pleasure to show you around sometime. For sure.
Very good. Very good. Aberfeldy 16?
Yeah, let's
Yes,
move on to
well.
that. I think a great shout. So,
So,
we sent out a couple of different samples. This is one that you've got, Kerry, right?
it's the one that I have. Yes, 16.
Oh, such a
Oh,
sweet
Wait a minute,
sound.
Let me do
No
love
that.
sweeter sound.
Oh, that's what we want to hear. It is one of the nicest sounds in life, right? It's just
Yes,
that cork
absolutely.
coming out.
This screw
And
top just doesn't do it.
no, and what a reveal we have now again on the nose, right? I think you've got all that lovely kind of honeyed note that we talked about before, but we've got this kind of development now. And we're finishing, whereas we didn't have a finishing cask for the 12, we're finishing now for the 16 in Oloroso sherry. So again, it's about sort of 6 months, and we're transferring everything into an Oloroso sherry cask. And I
I
think
feel
those
like
kind of,
when I
yeah,
smell the nose on this one, it's like when you go to the grocery store and they have like a range of different honeys with different pollens. So I feel like that
a really
one's like a
rich,
clove and one's like,
intense, yeah, kind
yeah,
of.
but it's definitely
Honey
honey, but it's definitely different scent than the other one.
honey is not just honey, as I've realized in this job. And again, Georgie Bell, my wonderful predecessor, started up this program we have called Barrels and Bees. And the whole idea was when we're thinking about cocktails with our whiskey, and for a lot of bartenders, and I'll say I was guilty of this as well. I just thought honey was honey. But I think, you have I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but the mass produced supermarket, not so great honey, when we say,
Right.
where the goal is just mass production, not
It's an
great.
it's an indiscriminate blend of honeys.
Yeah. And you've got a lot of, maybe sugar and things added, and, it's not great beekeeping practices. We'll say that as well. And then you find, a local artisanal producer. And we did some tastings where it was, their honey, supermarket honey alongside some of these great local producers. And we have a global bee partner called Bermondsey Street Bees, who I definitely recommend from London. And she's at what's called a honey sommelier. And Sarah is just this fountain of knowledge on all things bees. And we tried all these different honeys from all around the world. And my mind was blown that honey is not just honey. So, as you're saying there, Kerry, for me, this is, a lovely, dark, rich,
Hmm.
intense, kind of honey. It's got a real kind of sort of bite to it as well, and getting
Yeah.
into those kind of dark, rich Christmas cakey notes. But yeah, it's encouraging, bartenders to support local and really think about, a good cocktail is only as good as your worst ingredient, right? If you're putting a fairly bog standard, mass produced honey in there, it's not going to be great. And we have what we call our Golden Dram cocktail, which is like our honey twist in an old fashioned. So instead of, your Demerara sugar or whatever, we're substituting, a 50-50 honey syrup, honey water, bringing it down, adding that in along with a drop of Angostura bitters original, bit of orange bitters in there as well, and double measure of Aberfeldy. It makes one mean old fashioned cocktail. That's
Sounded
what I
like
like
you were
to do.
winding a clock there for a second.
Now,
The 18.
we're moving through. We've gone from what I describe as the core range, which we have as the Aberfeldy 12, the 16, the 21. We like to give back to fans, and we like to have this special range, which we call exceptional cask. And that's what you've got in your hand there, Philip. One of our recent kind of series we've been running is this French, wine cask series. Back in, I think it was 2019 now, we launched the first one, which was a 15-year-old Pomerol. Again, your sort of right bank French or Bordeaux wine cask, lovely kind of big juicy fruit. For me, that was like wine gums, really, really bursting with fruit. What you have now is the more recent edition, the 2020 release from that series. I'll need to pour myself some here as well. And that is the Poyac. So
Yes, this is ex Pauillac Bordeaux casks.
exactly. If your typical right bank for me probably was something like a Pomerol. You think of that drier inland, later ripening, kind of big, juicy, bold fruits. The 18 for me is your typical left bank, Bordeaux, and finished in those, let's say,
So it's
Bordeaux
left
wine
bank,
casks.
so it's comparatively rebellious
Yeah, big
because it's left
tannin,
bank.
big tannins, right? It's that again, quite different kind of gravel beds.
This is
That
radical.
kind of
This is radical, all right.
later
Yeah.
ripening, yeah, and you still have that honeyed kind of backbone. But we get into something, and I know, apologies here, Kerry, you're just going to have to wait till Philip sends you over an extra bit of this sample, right? It is, for me, a whole new level of Aberfeldy, and I love the core range is fantastic. I think it is the core range for a reason. It's just a great all-rounder. This is just something different from Aberfeldy, and that's kind of the job of the exceptional cask, is for Stephanie McLeod, our malt master, and her team to look at just interesting and exciting other casks that can kind of accentuate different facets of the Aberfeldy character.
Note to listeners, we will be interviewing Stephanie in a future episode, along with Fraser Campbell,
who is my counterpart, is the global Dewar's ambassador
yes.
as well. So I look after everything single malt. He looks after the blends, and then Stephanie, I mean, she is hard lady to get hold of these days because she is winning awards left, right, and centre. Literally everybody wants to interview at the moment.
Where we got a hold of her.
You went right to the source, and as I say, I can't wait to hear that, because every time I hear Stephanie talking, you learn something new. She is an absolute fountain of knowledge again, and just so well regarded in the industry. As I say, with those massive awards winning, Master Blender of the Year, a few big awarding bodies over the last couple of years. So I think she's just really hit this new stride in her form in the finishing cast that she's using. But she'd always say, the job of a finish is never to dominate, the distillery character. You always want to be able to tell what the distillery is. It should never overpower that. And I think that's what she does so well. And with what you're seeing there with the 18, for me, that is still clearly Aberfeldy. You've got that lovely honey backbone to it, but then those really kind of interesting, already it's a bit, funky, a bit kind of earthy, a bit tannic. And cherries, it's these lovely kind of sort of dried kind of stone fruits coming through there as well.
Do you know how long?
Thoughts on that, Philip?
Do you know how long it sits in the Pauillac casks?
I think it's about sort of 4 to 5 months for the finishing period here. So again, any longer than that, she felt it would kind of have overpowered the distillery character.
Yeah,
it's one we don't give an exact. We say 4 to 5 months because it's an organic process, right? It's not something that's mechanized. The guys have to keep checking the casks and making sure it's right and it's the desired flavor.
For me, again, it has that backbone. It has that honey core, but there's a spice blast.
Totally, just add a cup of water as well.
Delightful spice blast.
Is it like a rye spice blast?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we like that.
Very much.
But I think it has this lovely kind of tannic, winey, there's no other word for it, kind of mouth coating. And this is one of these, if this was the last whiskey you tasted before bed, you'd kind of wake up tasting it tomorrow morning kind of thing, right? It just sits beautifully on the palate.
Yeah. Oh, this is glorious. What does the future hold for Aberfeldy? What can we look forward to?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I'm sworn to secrecy on a lot of things because our new product development team, kind of innovation side, we are really going for it now, looking at there's, with the easing, I would say, or defining maybe more clearly of the rules with casks, what you can and can't do, back was at 2018 now with the SWA. It has, of course, opened the doors to maybe using some other interesting things. So I will say many avenues are being explored right now. We're definitely looking down a lot of the traditional cask routes as well. So as I say, French red wine cask for us in Aberfeldy, I think go hand in hand. And I will say, watch this space because there is going to be very soon the third, kind of release coming on in that series. Something very exciting, very interesting. And I can't wait to talk about that with you maybe down the line as well.
And just a note before we move on to Cregelakey, again, the Aberfeldy whiskies, as I believe the Cregelakey's, their principal aging takes place in principally ex-bourbon casks. Yes,
a lot, predominantly ex-bourbon, a lot of sherry casks, Oloroso. If we usually just talk about sherry, we usually mean Oloroso. That said, you'll see across our range now. Royal Brackla is a good example, which we'll talk about in the next one. But we're getting a lot of Palo Cortado casks and a lot of PX casks kind of coming into inventory as well. So, I think Stephanie's really become, someone on a mission in kind of the pursuit of the art of sherry cask finishing, right? There are loads of great sherries to use, not just Oloroso, but
you see a lot of Oloroso. Right? You see a fair bit of PX of Pedro Jimenez, but Palo Cortado, not so much.
Right.
Yeah. Cregelakey, we actually did, when we are moving on to Cregelakey now, that is one we did do as an exceptional cask in some markets a few years ago. I think it was a 19-year-old, I want to say. One of my all-time favorite uses of Cregelakey. I think it was that funky, musty, slightly zesty. I mean, we were saying before, Philip, right, that Palo Cortado was the winemaker's choice. It is this, unusual sherry cask in itself where, I believe it's a flora, isn't it? The Fino cask and the flora is naturally kind of dying off, and they say they're going to continue it on, and you end up with this really unusual sherry. So it makes for such interesting use in whiskey, and I can't wait to see what we're doing with it across our range now.
Good.
Yeah.
But
That sounds
let's
amazing.
see what happens. There we go. Cregelakey, you're seeing two important names there for Cregelakey.
Edward and Mackey.
I will start out by saying, if you thought I talked a lot about Aberfeldy, just wait for Cregelakey. As I say, this is a home bias coming in. And I always say, we should do this last in a tasting, not only
Here's
because
Mackey.
it's a bigger, meaty...
There's
there we go.
The McTavish, aka Mackey.
Yes. And he just got his hair did yesterday.
What a lovely dog.
He's so cute.
So from one Mackey to another.
Yes, it's the closest thing I could get to a dog to Scotch. So there you go.
He's a single malt. He's a single malt breed.
He is. He does not shed. He does not pee in the house. He's fantastic.
Yeah, and he's not peated, correct?
He's not peated. No, he's not peated.
No, he's just not peated. Okay.
He's not peated.
Well, we're getting into a more robust, not quite peated character here, but something rather unusual with Cregelakey. As I say, I always leave it to last, usually in a tasting, because it has a robust character and profile. So definitely should come after Aberfeldy, which was a plain malt, nothing in there at all. But also, what a sound! Cregelakey, literally, whatever time we've got left to talk, I will take all of that time and probably more talking about Cregelakey, because it has such an interesting history and heritage. And,
we'll edit.
Yeah, edit as through.
Wait.
The collective way.
And tell me to shut up when I've gone on for too long in this one as well. But Cregelakey, it is an unusual Speyside whiskey. It is. We've always said a bit of a contradiction in a glass in flavors, and I need to pour myself that 13 here. But you guys pour yourself that Cregelakey 13. Have a little smell, have a little taste, and I'd love to get your thoughts before I kind of dive into my own thoughts on this one.
Oh, sure. And we want to hear the history of the brand, because it's certainly as rich as Aberfeldy.
The nose, I'm getting a very spicy yet floral tidbit.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful.
For me, I always like to say a bit tropical as well with this. And again, I don't want to be too leading, but as soon as I say something like pineapple, but not like a fresh, ripe pineapple. You can imagine this has been pineapple sitting maybe roasted on a barbecue or something. It's a little bit of that kind of roasted pineapple.
Pineapple Everett's made its way along the Gulf Stream to Scotland. But it's got a flavonoid in common with pineapple, to be sure. That's magnificent. And
that is not something new. We were saying, talking about the history. We are a distillery that has been said we've been old-fashioned since 1891. And I always think that's a bit of an inside joke, because if you look at our founding date, it was 1891. So what we're really saying is we have always been old-fashioned in our way of doing things. And that came from part of a quote from a very famous whiskey writer. I'm sure you guys are familiar with him, Alfred Bernard. Of course, the man who wrote that book, traveling around the United Kingdom, the whiskey distilleries of the UK as well. And he didn't visit Cregelakey initially. There was a later edition of the book that has some papers in featuring Cregelakey from journals that he wrote. I think it was like the 2008 edition of that book. But he talked about Cregelakey being a style seldom met with today. So this really kind of old-fashioned style and character for its time. And he did actually refer to it as the kind of old-fashioned Glenlivet style, but not necessarily the Glenlivet, of course, we know today. But Glenlivet, as we know, was kind of that area synonymous almost what we would call Speyside today. It was that area kind of Scotland, honest with rife with illicit whiskey makers. Back in the day, we had everything going for us in the area, an abundance of water. We are called Speyside because we have so many tributaries running down into the River Spey, an abundance of natural water. We are still known as one of the best barley producing regions. Moray, the area within Speyside today. And of course, we could get hold of your yeast, so the area was kind of rife, with that. But so really harking back to that kind of old Speyside character, really, with that lovely kind of pineapple note coming through. And Alfred Bernard called out, and we reckon there wasn't a date on the paper, but he made reference to the new hotel that was just built in the village. Of course, the very now famous Cregelakey Hotel. So we reckon it must have been around sort of 1893, and that would kind of place that document. So just a few years, really, after the distillery was built. And, the guys have just built this distillery, but, the methods that they're using are still considered old-fashioned for the time. So it really was this kind of old school style of production. That pineapple note he called out then. So I think it's great that that's a note that was called out, in about 1893, and it still is a note prevalent, within the distillery today. Right. I think a lot of that from Yep.
I was going to say, 1891. This renders it marginally older than Aberfeldy, but no more than 5 or 6 years.
A few years, there as well. I mean, it's
our
oldest distillery. Our oldest is Royal Bracla, so 1812 we go back to there.
Wow.
Our next would be Cregelakey, in the scheme of things there, to say 1891. And it was built by two whiskey icons. One you probably will have heard of, and one I would be surprised if you had heard of, but I'll be delighted if you have. So one of them being Peter Mackey, who is famed for the brand White Horse, came from the Mackey blending family based out of Glasgow. They had ownership of Lagavulin distillery as well. Peter Mackey probably put a mark in history for anyone who's seen The Angel's Share, that movie where they've got that elusive whiskey. Do you remember the name, of course, of that distillery? They're all trying to get hold of the bottles, was Malt Mill, that rare unicorn of whiskey these days. Well, that was actually Peter Mackey's building, and I think it really exemplifies Peter Mackey's character as to why it was built. And he had a deal, with Laphroaig at the time. They were getting lots of good whiskey from Laphroaig. Ownership changed, and then he no longer was able to get the deal he wanted. So he said, right, if I'm not going to get the deal I want, I'm going to build another distillery right next to Lagavulin on our land. I'm going to try build a second Laphroaig. I'm going to pay the workers at Laphroaig to come and work for me. And I'm going to take the water source from Laphroaig and use it for my water source at this new, it's almost like Laphroaig 2, but they called it Malt Mill. And that was a testament to his character. He was not a man to be messed with, His friends called him Restless Peter. He was always on a mission. He was always fighting government on legislation, on minimum aging. He was always weird and wonderful hobbies. He was I think it was a Kerrigan moss farmer, which was a medicinal moss. He had a tweed mill. Any photo of him, he's in full tweeds kilt, shooting dogs and, gun in hand. He wrote books on gamekeeping, on fishing and hunting. He created something called BBM, which stood for blood, bone, and muscle, which he used to feed to all his workers as different distillers. Now, that sounds horrible. I'm pleased to say that those were not the ingredients. That was what it was meant to improve, was your blood, your bone, and your muscle. And it was a coarse oatmeal that could be either eaten as a porridge or turned into a bread. He was thinking happy workers will be good workers and healthy workers will be good workers. So he really took the health of his workers to heart. I think another distillery of his, Hazelburn, I think was the first to get a distillery labs on site and really starting to analyse your samples scientifically. So he was a guy way ahead of his time, really interesting character. Another famous writer, Sir Robert Lockhart, once famously described him as 1/3 eccentric, 1/3 genius, and 1/3 a megalomaniac. He was this really interesting character within Scotch whisky. On the other side of things, we have two, joint founders here, and I think we have the yin to Peter Mackey's yang in our other founder. Now, I'm going to put you guys on the spot here and test you here. Do you know his name? Well, I guess you've got a little hint on the lid there. As well, but he's
Alexander Edward.
Spot on, and so many people.
I was going to say Mr. Edward.
Because research,
of course. But most people, you say, do you know the other man's name? And I always say, He built Cregelakey. He also would build Altmore. He inherited Ben Rinnes from his father, David Edward. That was the second distillery he would take on after Cregelakey. He took out the lease on Oban not long after building Altmore, and then he moved through to Forest and built Dallas Moor, later known as Dallas Dew, before it was mothballed, and also Ben Romich as well, of course, G&M now. So we had loads of distilleries under his name, huge impact on the industry, very involved blenders.
Pardon the pun, but pardon the pun, but he was a serial distiller.
He was. We're going to be friends here. This is my sort of chat. Loads of distilleries kind of behind his name, but very few people knew him. And I always say, unlike his blending friends, he was really good friends with Tommy Dewar. There's accounts of the two of them chatting in the Cregelakey Hotel in Robert Bruce Lockhart's book. Peter Mackey, obviously, his business partner. Many other blenders across Scotland. But I think he kind of shied away from, the limelight a little bit. He was the deed itself was enough, I think, for Alexander Edward. He was a well-known local philanthropist. He gave back to the village and the area in so many ways. He opened up his large luxury manor house. He let the army take it over as a pop-up military hospital in the Second World War. He gifted a huge portion of his estate called Kintail to the Royal Northern Infirmary Hospitals. He set up fighting funds for farmers when they were struggling for barley, coming in from other countries, and Scottish farmers struggling with competing with prices. He set up funds for them to compete with their barley prices. There was honestly loads of things he did. He gifted, basically, I think we're one of the first villages in Scotland to have electric street lighting installed in Cregelakey. Wow. It was because he had his distillery up on the hill and he had his hotel down towards the train station. So as he was connecting the two with electricity, he thought, I may as well just run street lights through the village for all the locals. So, there's loads of little sort of sweet touches that he did, and, built up the brickworks and the villa houses in the village. He was so important to Speyside. But as I say, because he shied away, I think, from getting his name sprawled across the newspapers and fighting government like, Peter Mackey, he's this kind of forgotten hero within the whiskey industry. So I love to talk about him, and just because I think he's so important, and I love to spread his name. So those are our two founders with Cregelakey. So two really different, contrasting founders and characters. And I think that's exactly what you have in a glass with Cregelakey, because we talked about, the kind of fruitier pineapple side. I talked again about, not being a ripe pineapple. It was a toasted pineapple. And again, I think, especially with a bit of water, you start to see this kind of cordite, kind of wet gunpowder, kind of funky, kind of unusual, smoke, but not like an Islay whiskey, typical Islay kind of smoke. For me, Islay distilleries might be standing next to a bonfire. If that's the case, Cregelakey is like your close the day after. When they've got that grip of smoke to them as well. So
you beat me to it. You beat me to it. I was going to say cordite. That's my tasting note, cordite.
And I think for Stephanie, I think she often refers to it as cordite as well. You've got a good nose in the earth, Philip. You could be a master blender, because I know that's exactly what she would say.
I kid. Yeah. Now Cregelakey means rocky cliff, and from the Cregelakey, one can see the Macallan distillery just across the Spey. Okay, and friendly rivalry over the years.
We're all pals, and I try to say this to folk. At the sales side of things, and marketing and stuff, it can get a bit heated. But you go to the guys who are making the whiskey, and we're all friends. You'll see guys from loads of different distilleries in Speyside sitting around the same table, in a bar. And if anyone's having a problem at one distillery, the more experienced stillmen from another distillery are trying to help them sort it out. We're all friends, kind of from that perspective. And I know for some of our distilleries, there's been like a major,
not American.
Well, there is as nice that is, there's an ulterior motive, I suppose, as well, because Scotch whisky is an unusual one, because a lot of us are blending houses at the same time from the big companies. We need them to stay in production. We need to keep their production going, because we'll probably get some of that whiskey. So, I guess it's a really rare industry where, although in some respects we're kind of competing against each other, we also need some of each other's whiskey to make a lot of our blends. But at the heart of it, most of us, who are families who've been in it for generations, some of their family work at one distillery, some of their family work at another distillery. It's one of these things that we've all got friends and family working in different places, and people do occasionally swap around, different stills. So it pays off to be friendly because, we are all pals. But
It's
I
awesome.
see
This
we're
is
moving on to
delicious.
the 17, so let me
We
pour myself
are.
a little 17.
We moved. What are you talking
I
about?
think
Where were
I think
you? Where are you, dude?
that was a polite hint for me. I think from Philip there. You're talking too much on this one. But I think we go
You talk.
from a lovely kind of banana note. I'll say my friend Gary Ross. I call him Gary the Grain Man Ross. Have you ever seen the movie The Rain Man? Dustin Hoffman. He's got all the
Yes.
numbers rattling around in his head. I say Gary
Water.
Ross is that
Gotta
for
see George.
whiskey
George
facts and
Wapper.
figures. He is definitely someone you need to get on and talk to because
So he's a whiskey savant.
Whiskey savant, exactly. So he took on my role as the brand home's ambassadors. He is just an absolute fountain of knowledge. We used to sit on our lunch breaks together, going through the malt whiskey yearbook and challenging each other, saying, "Okay, it was a distillery built in this year with this capacity. What is it?" And Gary would just have them every time he knows them. So definitely someone you'll want to speak down the line. But one of his favourite tasting notes for Cregelakey is saying it's like ripening banana. Whereas maybe with the 13, you have a fairly green, kind of unripe banana, really interesting, funky notes. With the 17, we're getting more into kind of a really nice kind of ripe banana. By the time you get into like Cregelakey 23, or you get into the Cregelakey 31, you kind of move along our line. You get into, by the Cregelakey 31, you're into kind of like banana bread. It's this lovely kind of
Okay,
rich
can you
kind
send
of
that over? Because
cereal.
banana bread is my favorite thing.
Well, Cregelakey 31,
And
it's very
specifically
hard to
my mom's banana bread.
get. I love a good banana bread, but it is very hard to get hold of a Cregelakey 31 now. There we go. That's a great comparison there on screen from Philip. So you can see from that, I think the one it was the right for me there. I don't know if it was mirrored or not here, but that was kind of Cregelakey 13. The one on the left, couple of little black spots coming on. That is a good, there we go. That one on the riper. That was a frozen banana there or something.
No, these are both from my backyard. We have five banana trees, four species.
I was just saying to Kerry there, that is, for me, Cregelakey 31, if you're ever lucky enough to try it, is like a lovely baked kind of banana bread, but hard to get hold of these days because Cregelakey was this whiskey nobody had really heard of. It was kind of like a malt spotters, kind of cult following. And then we only really launched, I should say, under the Bacardi name, the standard range in 2014 with what we call the last great malts. And really, the standard kind of bottlings have progressed since then. But before that, when we were owned by the DCL at the time, of course, eventually became Diageo, which was why it was sold to Bacardi. You had these occasional kind of flora and fauna bottling. So there was a 14-year-old from Cregelakey.
Right.
But
so as an operation, it's old. It had some years on it. But as a brand, it's young.
Fairly young. That's what people always say. How is it competing? With all these new whiskies. You only launched in 2014. I say we may be new brands, but we are very old whiskies. We've got such a great history and heritage, and that's been kind of passed on. But the 31, the 23, the year we launched, 2015, it won Best Scotch at I think it was the San Fran Awards, and then it was 2 years later, 2017. The 31 won World's Best Whiskey at the World Whiskey Awards, Best Single Malt. And suddenly it went from people saying, "Oh, you're from Cregelakey, never heard of it." It went to, "Oh, you're from Cregelakey. Didn't that just win a big award? Can you get me some?" So it suddenly put Cregelakey, I think, on the map as this place to, to go and check out our whiskey.
Was Cregelakey, were there independent bottlings of it?
Some great indie bottlings over the years as well.
Okay.
So there has been quite a few, and I definitely encourage you go and try some. Again, I'm very biased being from the village, but we have some great whiskey bars in the village. We're a tiny village of less than 600 people, but we had 3 really renowned whiskey bars in the village. One of them being the hotel, which Alexander Edward actually built as well, which has the Quake Bar, one of the biggest collections, I think, in Scotland. But the kind of local favourite for me is the Highlander Inn, run by Tatsuya, this, again, amazing fountain of knowledge. And he has a really good collection of some indie bottling. So I definitely try to get through a few when I can, and there are a lot of great ones out there to try. But for me, I think Stephanie, and her skill, there just can't beat it though. I think all the indie bottlings have been good.
And
I think
for
this is phenomenal. This is phenomenal.
For those people out there that have been living under a rock, tell us a little bit about Stephanie and how long has she been doing what she's doing with you guys?
So I think Stephanie joined in, I want to say now you're testing me here, I haven't thought about this in a while. I think like 2008, something like that, I think rings a bell. And she took on, I think it was maybe a few years before that, but I want to say she took on I can't remember if it's the malt master role then taken over from, was it David Howie, the previous malt master, but something like that. I want to say about 2008, but she's kind of gone, I think, from strength to strength. And it really has been the last few years. I think she's really come into her own and been recognised for it. She has a busy job. It's not only malt master for Aberfeldy and Cregelakey, it's for our other 3 single malts as well, with Altmore, with whiskey from Macduff, the Devon, and Royal Brackla as well. Then also our blends. So, Dewar's, she is the master blender for Dewar's as well. And then we also have William Lawson, which is another huge blended Scotch whiskey, depending on which country you are in the world. But yeah, another
July 2006 is when Stephanie McLeod became master blender at Bacardi Global Brands.
Fairly close. I'll take that.
Oh, what would we do without Google?
I know.
That was LinkedIn. That was LinkedIn.
Oh, it was LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah.
For the check there.
Please. We want to. We aim to inform. we aim to inform.
But the 17, I think it is a progression in flavour from the 13, where we went from. I always remember Gabe Gardarella, who we've talked about, the national ambassador for Dewar's. He always described Cregelakey 13 like firing a shotgun through a pineapple, which I just thought was one of the most visual tasting notes I've ever heard. Fantastic. And it gets the 2 kind of sides of the character. With the 17-year-old, there's a little bit of licorice kind of added into here as well. You kind of get that note through here. It's a kind of aniseed kind of note. It's a really kind of floral, kind of herbal note coming through as well, alongside that kind of ripening banana. But I love it. I should say as well, the whole core range for us, which is the 13, 17, 23 is kind of on hold for the moment. It's getting very hard to keep that up in the core range. You might still find it in some markets. If you do, it's an absolute gem. Like hen's teeth these days, though. It's a real rarity. But the whole core range we have, you like that one, Philip? The whole core range for us is 46%. It is, I've lost you here. You've done well to keep that Craig 17 down.
Breathe, Philip, breathe.
But it is non-chill filtered, 46%. And we're finishing everything across the 13 and 17 in a combination of first fill bourbon and first fill sherry cask. So some of it goes into first fill bourbon, some of it goes into first fill sherry, and we marry it all together at the end. So I think you get a lovely kind of spiciness, kind of punch to it coming through because of that as well. Not your typical Speyside though, right? I think there's those kind of unusual notes coming through. And if I'm going to talk about 2 things that make Cregelakey, we use sulfured malt. So it's kind of what we call an oil-fired kiln. We are one of the last distilleries really to use this in Scotland. I think Diageo have one kicking around somewhere. But we use a specialist maltster called Glenesk, based over at Montrose, kind of just between Aberdeen and Dundee. And this is a very unusual practice. And I realised this when I got a visit there. Normally you don't get a visit. I went along with Georgie Bell. The 2 of us went over to there one day, arranged it with the maltings manager. And kind of when I arrived, they're not used to having guests. So the first person I bumped into, I kind of said to, hey, we're here for a visit. And he said, are you the guys from Cregelakey? I said, yes. And all he said was, oh, you guys are weird, and walked off. And that was literally my welcome to this place. And it was just, I'll never forget it. It was such just a great welcome. And we caught up with him later on. We met the site manager, Ronnie McDonald, great guy. And I caught up with this other guy later on. I said, what a welcome. What on earth did you mean by that? And he said, he'd worked in maltings for like 20 years. He'd never seen a request for barley quite like Cregelakey's. And they have 4 different kilns at Glenesk. The other 3 are kind of your typical kind of, drying with hot air. Kiln number 2 is that oil-fired kiln where, it's very rarely you have a direct firing, underneath. So it lets have those flames kind of licking up, and you get a lot of sulfur impregnated into the barley because of this. And, most distilleries, from speaking to the maltsters, if the trace level of, sulfur is above 3 parts per million, they're rejecting it. That is kind of the absolute max they would go. Anything lower is much better. Cregelakey is a standard. We're looking at like 10 times that. And they said that's such an unusual request. And most distillers, again, once they get into the distillery, they're looking to do everything they can to kind of lose those kind of heavier, kind of sulfury notes. We try and retain them. And again, we have huge stills. Someone once said they look like they've had too many Happy Meals kind of thing. They're a huge basin. I'm going up into this lovely, big, wide kind of neck. along a horizontal kind of line arm, and then out where you'd expect to see a shell and tube condenser goes straight through a hole in the wall and out to our worm tubs. And we're one of only 19 distilleries still in Scotland using the old-fashioned worm tub method of condensing. So with that, again, we're encouraging less copper contact. The way we run them, this layer of sort of film develops within the worm, buffering it from a lot of that copper contact. So it has the cooling effect. It doesn't remove a lot of those kind of bigger, heavier, kind of sulfuric kind of notes as well. So, Stephanie will tell you, I know when you get her on that, Cregelakey on the nose of the new make spirit, it has this massive kind of sulfury note to it. It's very hard to get the fruits coming through. But if you were to run it through the computer behind the scenes as well, it has the potential for probably the biggest amounts of fruit of any of our new make spirit, with the compounds that are there. And I think the role of maturing Cregelakey is just to allow some of that sulfur to dissipate and come into this lovely balance between the two of allowing those tropical notes to kind of shine through, but at the same time, those kind of sulfury notes that make Cregelakey come through. Such a different way.
This is my new favorite whiskey. Of course, I'll have another one next week. But
cheers to that.
Sauvage.
Phenomenal. This is wow. Kerry and I have learned a great deal through this podcast.
Yes.
But sometimes the experiences, they're all good to one degree or another, but sometimes they are exceptional. I'm gonna say I think this is an exceptional one.
I'm gonna agree with that. I'm gonna agree with that.
Very
Shall we talk cocktails?
Yeah.
Let's talk cocktails.
So
where to start?
So Philip, let's do the lead in, Philip. Go for it. You have the floor.
I direct the cocktail collection. Used to be known as for many years as the Museum of the American Cocktail. We recently reorganized and rebranded the cocktail collection. Fewer words, more descriptive of the global phenomenon that is the cocktail. Talk to us about cocktails. What's your favorite, not your favorite cocktail, but your go-to category? And how do you like to see the brands you represent cocktailed? And should you walk into a bar that doesn't carry your brands, what do you order?
Great question for sure. I grew up thinking, whiskey is a neat drink for a long time, right? And it took me a long time to kind of get my head around cocktails.
I agree with that.
But I will say,
but we also know, yes, Kerry, but we also know that cocktails move product.
Yes.
But I honestly think, as we've said, a good cocktail is only as good as its worst ingredient, right? And I think whiskey cocktails have so much to offer. And I'm totally behind whiskey cocktails now. Like, honestly, I think it's such a great way to enjoy whiskey. And it's the same, you speak to most people in the villages who make the stuff, and a lot of them enjoy it in cocktails as well, right? And I think it's more this kind of preconception that you can't do this, but obviously you look back in history, whiskey being enjoyed probably neat was something way newer, right? That was kind of something that came around in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Whiskey cocktails is where it all began. The whiskey and soda, right? With your whole phylloxera and the substitution of brandy and scotch and all this.
Right.
We've got a long history with, apple
whiskey,
close.
When whiskey filled the vacuum.
Recipes.
Yeah, when whiskey filled the vacuum, when brandy virtually left the market because of the phylloxera epidemic. Yes, indeed. Yeah, so whiskey cocktails. Yes.
God's place. For me, I think I'm really jumping on the highball trend here. I think for that occasional, especially the summer's day, when we have that one day in Scotland, right, when the sun does finally come through, there's nothing better than just a refreshing highball. So for me, it's been starting to experiment with what makes a good highball. What is that? What do you build it up with? And Aberfeldy, we have a lovely honey highball, as we've been talking about the lovely kind of honey characteristics.
That sounds good.
Again, you're making that honey syrup, again, a 50-50 kind of water, just stirring it down, cold water, I think is the best way, so you're not, losing a lot of that flavor by adding hot water into it. I think, stirring it down, adding that in, double measure of Aberfeldy 12, again, sort of 25, 20 mil of your honey syrup, and then building that up with a chamomile tea. I've been doing a lot of experimentation. I think chamomile tea is definitely the way forward. It's it really accentuates those honeyed notes. It works beautifully, that balance of chamomile and honey, and it is such a refreshing highball, building it up that way. So highballs for me. Altmore as well, I think we'll come on to talk about that next time, but I think Altmore and just a clean soda, again, it's such a refreshing drink. And I think, whiskey a lot of the time isn't the most refreshing. I don't think, I'm going to drink whiskey to be refreshed. But when you have something like
But when
a
you're doing a
highball,
highball,
Yes, it is.
yeah.
Yes, it is.
that is it for me.
When it's a highball on ice, sure.
To me,
Yeah.
a nice, full-bodied single malt is the same as hot coffee on an August afternoon. It works for me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but see, that's all hot.
But other cocktails, it's the classic. I'm sure everybody says it, an old fashioned again, right?
Mhm.
I think I love something pretty built up like that. Would you believe with Aberfeldy, again, we've got another honeyed example of our old fashioned. So as I say, we call it the Golden Dram. As I mentioned before, that mixing, down with the honey syrup and the bitters as well there. So we talked about that one earlier, but I think there's loads of different ways to enjoy it. But yeah, twists and old fashions. We found a good one for Cregelakey as well. And we've been calling it the Old Soul, where you substitute some pineapple bitters, pineapple syrup, in there as well, with some Agnesura bitters. Again, just really kind of
I have to
those
try
pineapple
that.
notes.
Yeah.
Bit of dehydrated pineapple as your garnish on the top there. It's a winner.
I have to try that. That sounds magnificent.
Absolutely.
Now you walk into a bar. Matt Cordiner walks into a bar, and none of your 5 brands is on the back bar.
Which is ridiculous and wouldn't happen.
Ridiculous.
But yeah,
Who would darken the door? What do you?
I mean,
order?
I am a Speyside boy through and through, I think, and I genuinely think.
I mean, not a boy,
Can't go
but
wrong with the Speyside. I will say, one of the first whiskies I remember trying that got me into whiskey was Aberlour. Just along the road.
Oh, I love
and
Aberlour.
Abuna. And again, I know you're a big sherry fan, right, Philip? So
And
I
that
remember,
one in particular, yeah.
Yeah, our early batches of Abuna, was probably some of the first things I remember trying in the world of whiskey again. Friends working in the distillery, bottles getting dropped around at my dad's, my family's, dad having a sip of something, me saying, "Oh, what's that? That's really dark for a whiskey. Can I give that one a try? It looks pretty unusual." And then just being blown away with this big sherry bomb, right? So I think that is definitely a great whiskey as well. But it's such a hard question, right? But I think Speyside for me, I've never had a Speyside whiskey I don't think I like. I do like a bit of peat now and again. I definitely have dabbled with kind of Islay whiskies. It's growing on me. I'm still a Speyside boy through and through, I think. But there we go.
ditto, except for Speyside Girl.
Speyside lass.
Yeah.
Lass,
Speyside
yes.
lass.
Speyside lass.
Twins and lasses.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
This has been fantastic, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us today on this.
My pleasure.
I hope it's, I would rather be where you are because it's way too freaking here. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic. We would love to catch up with you later about that mysterious new release that's coming out that you kind of led us upon earlier.
Depending on when I come back to discuss the next 3 distilleries, it might be out by then. We'll see. And so if it is, I'll definitely reveal what it is or was, depending. So folks will just have to stay tuned for the next one, for the big review.
Exactly.
We look forward to hosting you again because I know the Altmore and the Deveron and Royal Brackler are also, they have their own rich, colorful stories. And
as my mum would say, I could blether for Scotland, right? Who knew I'd make a living out of it, right? Getting to actually talk about whiskey. But there are plenty of stories to share in those 3. Don't you worry.
For show notes on today's podcast, please visit our website at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include links and supporting documents from today's stories in this episode's blog post.
As always, you'll see upcoming topics, a guest roster, and links to past shows.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time,
Sláinte.
Spirits of Whiskey is produced by First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available via Anchor, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are heard.